Worst start to a Premier League season in over 10 years for Liverpool. 7 defeats in the last 9.
Yeah, it was the most alarming display, I think, of the season.
Florian Wirtz, who was decent against Real Madrid in midweek, struggled again to impact a big game in the Premier League. Mo Salah was kept very quiet by Nico O'Reilly.
Liverpool very, very fragile.
But as poor as Liverpool were, take nothing away from Manchester City. There aren't too many sides who I think could have lived with their tempo yesterday.
Are City back?
You have to say it's starting to look that way. But the star of the show was Jeremy Doku, wasn't he? He was absolutely outstanding, Doku, right from the first minute. And I think if they are going to haul in Arsenal, I still think it's a tall order with the way that Arsenal defended over the course of the season. Doku is going to be very much a key part of that.
I've started to get the feeling that the momentum is with Manchester City in terms of becoming the closest challengers to Arsenal. But are Liverpool already out of the title race?
I think City and Arsenal will be the title contenders now. I do think Liverpool just won't have that consistency.
I think they're already out the title race for the reasons Kev suggested. 8 points behind Arsenal. Manchester City going great guns, so competitive at the top of the table. I don't see this Liverpool team going unbeaten in their final 27 matches, and I think they would have to stand any chance of winning the league.
It's Premier League All Access with me, Sam Matterface, talkSPORT's Alex Crook, and we've also got celebrity Liverpool fan Kevin Hatchard, who joins us as well. Kevin, we'll get into what was a really good weekend for you and your boys in just a second. However, I must tell you, you've got to be really careful, boys, because you never know who's listening. You never know who's listening. And do you know why? Because on Saturday, I was in the deepest, darkest depths of the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. And there I was, just about to wrap up my post-match interview sagas, when all of a sudden, someone grabbed me by the arm and said, hey, I just want to talk to you about talkSPORT. I was like, yeah, well, okay, sorry, yeah, brilliant. He said, I was a long-term listener when I was in Portugal. I said, oh, you still listening now? He said, no, I can't listen now. Alex Crook is doing my head in. But it was good for me when I was in Portugal to learn the language and to learn the football parlance and to sort of get into vogue with what English people were thinking. I said, oh, thank you very much. That man was Ruben Amorim, would you believe? Big talkSPORT fan when he was in Portugal. Doesn't listen now because of Crookie, but he certainly was a big fan before. It wasn't really because of Crookie. It was to do with the fact that he said, I'm in it now and I can't really listen now because it's all too close to home. But he was a massive listener in Portugal. So you be careful what you're saying, boys, because the reach is far and wide, and you might be offending the next Liverpool, Chelsea, Manchester United, City manager. You never know, Kev.
Yes, and the irony would be that, a Portuguese person would be upset with Crookie when Crookie's pretty much
funded the academy,
up their tourism industry single-handed. So that would be a huge blow, wouldn't it, really? There was some kind of diplomatic war between Alex Crook and Portugal. That would be the ultimate irony, I think.
Yes, it would. Crook, so be on your best behaviour. You don't know who's listening.
Listen, I'm okay because I don't have prejudice. I offend everybody, so it's all good.
Right, okay, in which case, let's get into Manchester City against Liverpool. We were there yesterday in the rain, but it ended up that it was City and Guardiola that was celebrating 1,000 games in charge for the Catalan and a big 3 points. Let's dive into it. And we probably could have dived into it as well because it was absolutely sheeting it down yesterday at the Etihad Stadium. Worst start to a Premier League season in over 10 years for Liverpool. 7 defeats in the last 9. It was a sorry sight. Liverpool were just passengers, really, weren't they, Kev?
Yeah, it was the most alarming display, I think, of the season in some ways. I know people will look at Brentford and how they were outmuscled in that game, but I actually was very alarmed by that first half. Now, obviously, there was an element of the Real Madrid game had been a few days earlier. He picked exactly the same 11. But it was just, there was a little bit of trepidation in there. They got stuck in a halfway house. They didn't really press with the kind of intensity that we know they can. And City were able to play through that press at will in the first half. They were making mistakes. I think a lot of it stemmed from Doku's excellence down that left-hand side, because that spread uncertainty through the team. Because if you look at Konate, he's having to come across to help out Connor Bradley. Mo Salah wasn't dropping in to help out. And so when you've got that situation with Nico O'Reilly and Jeremy Doku dovetailing so beautifully on that left-hand side, then you're in real danger. And for City, it was a continuation of what I saw against Dortmund on Wednesday, when they were absolutely outstanding in the wide areas, because Savinho was causing all kinds of problems down the right that night, Doku down the left. And what that did was it allowed guys like Phil Foden to find these pockets of space in the middle. So, yes, Liverpool were awful, especially in that first half, really, really poor, but also City were excellent. So it was a bit of a combination of the two, but Liverpool very, very fragile.
Groupmeister, top scorers in the Premier League. All 23 of their goals have come from open play. 7 home wins in a row. Haaland about to record 100 Premier League goals faster than any other player, including Alan Shearer. Are City back?
You have to say it's starting to look that way. Obviously, last season was a really difficult one for Pep Guardiola. They started the rebuild in January. They upped it a gear in the summer. Got off to a reasonably underwhelming start by their high standards, but they're in the groove now. Erling Haaland can't stop scoring, even a missed penalty. Can't keep a great striker down, as I said on air yesterday. But the star of the show was Jeremy Doku, wasn't he? He was absolutely outstanding, Doku. Right from the first minute, he tied Andy Robertson in knots. Then he went over to the other wing and he had Connor Bradley dancing to his tune. And I think if they are going to haul in Arsenal, I still think it's a tall order with the way that Arsenal defended over the course of the season. Doku is going to be very much a key part of that. But at the other end of the pitch, and you mentioned this before the game, that Ruben Diaz will be straight back into the starting lineup. If he can stay fit, which he never really was last season, he's an absolute colossus. So I think him, Haaland, Doku, Foden have all got huge roles to play. But as poor as Liverpool were, take nothing away from Manchester City. There aren't too many sides who I think could have lived with their tempo yesterday.
Look, the way the Premier League has gone so far this season, we sort of ebbed and flowed between different challenges. Who's going to be closest up there? There was a point in the season, remember, where 3 games into it, Liverpool was 6 points better off than City. City above them now in the table. So we know things can change quickly. But I've started to get the feeling that the momentum is with Manchester City in terms of becoming the closest challengers to Arsenal. Things might have been different, though, Kev, if Liverpool had had a goal allowed when Virgil van Dijk at the far post heads the ball across John Donnarumma into the far corner. It was a bullet header, a really good header, excellent jump from him, but he was denied by the offside flag because Andrew Robertson was standing in an offside position. Chris Foy on the Men in Black podcast unpicks the decision. He says he probably, if he was the referee, would have liked to have seen a goal here. What's the feeling amongst you and your mates?
Yeah, look, I can understand why there's anger, and there is among Liverpool fans, that it wasn't given. But it's difficult, isn't it, when you've got somebody who's in an offside position so close to the goalkeeper, even if he's not directly in his eye line, you're always giving the officials that opportunity to rule out the goal. I would like to see that given. Because I don't think it influences the goalkeeper. He's not looking at Robertson. He's got a full dive in. He's not going to get to that ball. But we've made it complicated. And some of these situations result in a goal and some don't. And again, it's yet another situation where it's so complex for officials now that it's very difficult to get that same decision with the same components over and over again. So, look, it wouldn't take anything away from the fact that Liverpool deserved to lose the game, and Arne Slot was quite open about that afterwards. But I think we should always be looking to give goals rather than take them away. That's what I think we've lost with VAR, actually, in general. I think we should always be looking to reward attacking teams to give goals rather than take them away.
And actually, this dispels the argument that offside is black and white, because it isn't. You're not either offside or you're not. This was down to interpretation, and Chris Kavanagh decided that he was interfering with play. The thing I found odd, and I've still not really got an explanation for it, is why it took so long for the assistant to put his flag up. Virgil van Dijk was already away down by the left corner flag celebrating for a few seconds before the flag even went up.
Yeah, that would be a communication thing between the referee and the assistant. They might have been discussing where they thought that Andrew Robertson actually was, and they were replaying it in their minds between them and having a conversation because they're all mic'd up. You say offside is black and white. I think that when we say offside is black and white, we're talking about where you are on the pitch. You are either in an offside position or you are not. That is black and white because it's a geographical fact. Whether or not you're interfering with play is not black and white. That has always been subjective, and that's why there is subjectivity built into the law. And this was a very subjective decision. If you want proper analysis, by the way, of all of the weekend's VAR decisions, then the Men in Black podcast is for you. Just flick up on this feed and you will find it, and Chris will go through them for you. Is one of the big differences between these two teams, Crook, the fact that Erling Haaland has scored now 19 goals this season for Manchester City, and Liverpool's top goal scorer is Hugo Ekitike with 6.
Yeah, obviously, there's a problem there, and we didn't see it coming when Liverpool spent all that money on their forward line. I think Florian Wirtz, who was decent against Real Madrid in midweek, struggled again to impact a big game in the Premier League. Mo Salah was kept very quiet by Nico O'Reilly. O'Reilly justifying his decision, or his call-up rather, for the England squad. And then you look at the Alexander Isak situation, which, as I voiced on air, I don't really understand how he's got himself in a position where he is so unfit. I know he didn't train with Newcastle over the course of pre-season, but this is not like the 80s and 90s where players go away for the summer and come back 4 or 5 stones heavier. They're all athletes in tip-top condition, but obviously Arne Slot didn't feel like he was fit enough to make an impact even when Liverpool were chasing the game, and that is a big concern for me when you paid all that money on a striker. And I said to you last night, I'm not sure there's any winners at the moment from the Alexander Isak situation. You said maybe there's one in Nick Voltemade, but Newcastle look worse. Liverpool don't look any better. And at the moment, he's not justifying the fee.
Well, I mean, first of all, I don't think there was ever a time where players came back for pre-season 4 or 5 stones overweight.
I did wonder about that, actually. That'd be quite a sight, to be honest.
Maybe 4 or 5 kilos.
Did you see Neil Ruddock when he played for Swindon? That's all I'm going to say.
Maybe 4 or 5 kilos on average, but 4 or 5 stones might be pushing it slightly. I don't know.
Maybe that's where I'm going wrong.
What would you have been doing to put that much on over the course of the summer? Having a bloody good time, that is for sure. Wow. But I do think that the Isak thing is quite interesting, Kevin. Where are the Liverpool fans with this? Because this is a player who has been, the subject of a huge fee, a lot of hype. I mean, one of the things that if you speak to Liverpool officials, they will tell you, this is not a signing that we have made for the first 6 months of this season. It's not the first 6 days of the contract. It's not the first 6 weeks of the contract. This is a 6-year contract, and we expect him to deliver over that period. So this period will largely be forgotten if he goes on and scores a record number of goals, which he is more than capable of doing. But is there a slight frustration with the fact that he is yet to really even get a full 90 minutes under his belt at the kind of level that's required?
Yeah, I think there's an acceptance he's not fit. I think that's the first thing, and that is a concern. I think it's slightly offset by the fact that the Liverpool fans absolutely love Hugo Ekitike and the way he started. I think they're really, really enthused by the kind of player he is. I mean, you hear, you hear the gasps when he does certain things. It's not even when he's scoring goals, like some of those shimmies, some of the little touches. I think he's made a really positive impact. And I think that's slightly offset the negativity of what's happened with Isak. But I think there's an important point here to broaden out. And it might sound like me making excuses for Liverpool, as if I would do that. But I do think this transfer window was about the next 2, 3, 4 years rather than this one. And I think looking at it, there's no excuse for that first half at the Etihad. There isn't. But I think there's an element of taking a step back to take 2 or 3 forwards down the track, because Liverpool have got themselves into a position now where this has to work. It doesn't have to work now, but it does have to work because they won't have any wriggle room. And the doomsday scenario, actually, and I don't think this will happen, but it could happen if you look at the competitiveness of the Premier League this season. The doomsday scenario is not qualifying for the Champions League the next season. Because if that was to happen with the outlay that they've had, and they did sell very well, but they spent a lot as well, that is the doomsday scenario. So I don't think it will get that bad, but the Premier League is really competitive. So Liverpool, whether they get back in the title race or not, certainly do have to turn things around fairly quickly.
Yeah, and if you look at the Premier League table now, it's starting to take a little bit of shape. The orthodoxy is returning, and we've had a few years now where it's, we've had some interlopers that have been crashing the top 6, top 7. You get the feeling that at the end of the season, you'll see Arsenal, City, Chelsea, Manchester United, Liverpool, Tottenham, and Aston Villa very much up there contesting those top 6 or 7 places. It feels a little bit like that. Newcastle will also hope to be able to recover to get involved as well. But are Liverpool already out of the title race? My esteemed colleague here made up a statistic yesterday on air where he told everybody, including a former Premier League manager, that 5 defeats means you can't win the Premier League, and history and statistics back him up. Well, not quite, but anyway, because Manchester City in 2021 and Manchester City in 2014 did it with 6 defeats. But anyway, the point stands, losing a lot of games doesn't help you. So are they or are they not still in the title race?
Yeah, it just serves me right for asking AI a question. I told you I hate that technology. I'm not going near that again. But you're right. Only twice in the last 15 years have a team lost more than 5 games and won the title. Blackburn with 7 defeats in 94-95. Hold the record, and that would never have happened had Eric Cantona not have kung fu kicked a Crystal Palace fan. I think they're already out the title race for the reasons Kev suggested. 8 points behind Arsenal, Manchester City going great guns, so competitive at the top of the table. I don't see this Liverpool team going unbeaten in their final 27 matches, and I think they would have to stand any chance of winning the league.
So you're telling me that if Eric Cantona hadn't jumped into the crowd at Selhurst Park, Blackburn wouldn't have lost 7 games?
Blackburn wouldn't have won the league that year, having lost 7 games.
That's what you think. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. Okay. All right. As long as you're sticking with that, that's the most important thing. Should we? Let me ask her this question before we go, because Ray Parlour has been big on this. He said, as an Arsenal man, he's more fearful of Manchester City than he is of Liverpool. Do you understand why he said that? And do you think it's a tall order for Liverpool to come back from here and challenge Arsenal?
Yeah, I do. And I said at the start of the season, I thought City were live contenders to win it. And that Haaland's odds to win PFA Player of the Year were far too big. And it's turning out that might be the case because City are looking sharp. I think what we saw in the Club World Cup in the summer was Pep in the lab. We saw Pep working on a few different things, a few different approaches. Yes, they went out to Al Hilal, which was a blow, and it kind of, there were echoes of, the kind of performances that have got them in trouble in the Premier League. And they started this season in similar fashion. They had that defeat at Brighton where they fell apart. They've had other performances that weren't great. I think what's different now is the defensive structure. I think they look better without the ball. I think Nico has downloaded all the information Pep wants him to. And yes. I think he is not on Rodri's level, but if Rodri's not in the team, it's not suddenly klaxons going off everywhere and they don't think they can win a game. Nico being in that side has shown they can. And what that does is it allows all of the attacking players to do their thing. I think the other thing that's really interesting about Pep this season is that they are approaching games differently. They won that Bournemouth game with not a lot of possession in the grand scheme of things. If you look at what they did against Arsenal, they tried to press high. It worked for half an hour and then it didn't work. So what did they do? They dropped very unusually deep and were happy to hit on the counter-attack, and it nearly worked. So I think City and Arsenal will be the title contenders now. I do think Liverpool just won't have that consistency. I think they'll improve massively. And I think what actually could happen is Liverpool might be live contenders to win the Champions League. But in terms of finding that consistency to win the Premier League, Liverpool tend to be front runners when they win the Premier League and stretch out and don't come from behind. I'm not sure they can do that. So I still think City can win it. I think the gap is only 4 points. I think City can win the Premier League.
I love what Kev said there, by the way. Liverpool tend to be front runners when they win the Premier League. What, both times?
Well, look at the statistics. That's true.
Yeah, at least that's a statistic that is actually true. You didn't just make it up as you went along. I love about City that the sort of evolution of the team, and we were watching it tactically yesterday, sitting in the stadium, and the fact that the 2 fullbacks are actually midfield players that want to get forward makes a massive difference, because what they do is when they've got the ball, they provide the width. They both bomb on. They come up high and wide. Nico Gonzalez will just sit alongside the centre-backs and just provide that extra protection. They flood the middle of the park, so the right-sided midfielder will come in, make a box in midfield, and then you've got Doku, who's just sort of allowed to do what the hell he wants because he's got the ability to take everybody else on, and Haaland as the point man. And what that means is that when you've got, especially with Liverpool yesterday, they were so outnumbered in the middle of the park, they couldn't really get on the ball and start trying to force the issue because Manchester City was swamping them in that area. Also, the fact that the fullbacks were pushing so far on, it gave Wirtz extra defensive work to do.
Yeah.
It meant that Salah was having to try and he didn't get back as much as he should do, but he was, they were nullifying the wingers by pushing them further back into their own half. Look, I think, and I've said it, my Premier League prediction at the beginning of the season was Manchester City to win the league. I'm not sure whether they will or not. No one is. But I think they'll definitely be the closest challengers to Arsenal now. And I felt when I watched them against Borussia Dortmund, they were really impressive. And I thought I was backed up by the Liverpool performance at the weekend. Let's talk about Arsenal. They went away to Sunderland and drew 2-2. And Sunderland, with all due respect, are an absolute nightmare to play against. And they are quite happy to play into that narrative. They pulled the advertising boardings in an extra 2 metres, so it reduced the amount of area on the side of the pitch that Arsenal could try and wind up for long throws from. There was sort of tactics about delaying the restarts. They were roughing up. They were being a little bit physical. They were poking Arsenal. They were bullying Arsenal. And actually, I think Arsenal largely dealt with it very, very well in a hostile environment as well, until they didn't. And in that moment, Brian Brobby scores the goal, which is a very late equaliser. But when you win the league, you aren't going to win every single game. There are going to be matches that you're going to struggle in. And actually, you wonder whether this is 2 points dropped or a point gained at a very difficult place.
Yeah, at the end of the season, they might look upon it as an important point. It will feel like 2 points dropped just because the equaliser came so late. But I make you right. I think Sunderland were well worth a share of the spoils. And I wonder if they've actually laid down the blueprint of how to disrupt this Arsenal team. Because I think at times during this 10-game winning run, 8 of them without conceding, they've almost beaten teams in the tunnel, much like the great United side under Sir Alex Ferguson used to do. Their opponents have shown them far too much respect. Sunderland didn't do that. They were in their faces. They were direct. They made it, as you say, very hostile. And they got their awards. David Raya is a brilliant goalkeeper, but we were watching the goals back yesterday morning. I do wonder if he stays on his line rather than coming to try and claim the ball for the equaliser. Does Brian Brobby score? I think it's a much more difficult finish if the goalkeeper is actually in his net rather than in no man's land. So I think that does go down as a mistake from Raya. And maybe that was a byproduct of Sunderland putting all those long balls into the box.
Maybe, just maybe. I mean, I think you have to also acknowledge, don't you, Kevin, that they have a serious number of injuries. They did this Saturday with no Victor Gyökeres, who I think was actually quite a big miss. No Martin Ødegaard, no Madueke, no Martinelli. They've had to shuffle and change, especially at the top end of the pitch. When that's before we get to Kai Havertz and Gabriel Jesus as well. So Arsenal negotiating this period without all of that talent, I suppose, needs to be recognised.
Yeah, it does. And I think Trossard's really stepped up. Another great goal from him. There was talk in the summer of were Bayern interested in him? Could he move on? But he stayed put and he's played really, really well, I think, in a lot of games where he's been called upon. But you're right, and that's why you have to have a really deep squad. And I think it just so happens that so many of those injuries have been concentrated at the top end of the pitch. But I look at their defensive depth, and it is beyond belief, really, when you look at all of the options they have. And they have lots of players who can play multiple positions as well. Guys like Calafiori and Nkapie who can cover that left-back or centre-back role. Timber's versatile. You've got lots of different options there. But yeah, you're right. They're having to kind of mix and match. But this is part of Arsenal's evolution. They've spent heavily, rightly. I think they've spent well in a lot of areas. And they are now in a position where I think they can challenge at home and abroad. But yeah, they are being really tested at the moment by those injuries. I thought Sunderland were excellent. I've been so impressed with them. Because the interesting thing about them, I commentated on their game against Everton recently, and they started that game appallingly. They conceded a goal. They had a bit of a collective blackout where they were making the most basic mistakes. And the crowd pulled them through. And once the crowd had pulled them through, and they got that equaliser early in the second half, they suddenly looked as though they were the only team that were going to go on and win it. And when you're a promoted team, that connection between you and the home fans is so important. It's so important, because there will be games where you're not playing particularly well because the team you're playing are better than you, but they can drag you through and either turn a defeat into a draw or a draw into a win. I think that's going to be critical for them.
I think Timber, Ben White, Calafiori, Miles Lewis-Skelly, Nkapie, Gabriel, Mosquera and Saliba are without doubt the best group of defenders that you could assemble in the Premier League this season. As a group,
terrifying,
I think
isn't it?
There's literally nobody better. Yeah, he is.
Nkapie is a guy that's like maybe your second or third change. And I think he's a guy that, you know, a lot of top clubs have looked at and thought about spending big money for. Arsenal brought him in, and he's a depth piece in their defensive unit. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, well, listen, that's what you need if you're going to be a top team that are going to challenge for top honours. But you also need a top goalkeeper. I know that Crook was a little bit critical of the fact that he came off the line for the equalising goal right at the very end. But it shouldn't be sort of missed that he also made an unbelievable save from Brian Brobby just before that with the effort from the long throw. You might have remembered it. It was tossed into the box and then he got down brilliantly, not once but twice. So, listen, I think he's a major asset, and I don't think he's not immune from criticism, but he's certainly been a major piece in the puzzle for Mikel Arteta. Declan Rice's pressing for the equaliser was absolutely superb, and I think he's been on top form as well. And interestingly, you can probably look at it several different ways, but I think that Arsenal will look at the table at this point of the season and go 4 points clear. We've had a lot of injuries. We went on a good unbeaten run. We did get a little bit of an upset, but we can't win every game. 4 points at this stage of the season, I think we'll take that going into the busiest period.
A big week, though, isn't it, after the international break? What is it? Tottenham at home in the North London derby, Bayern Munich, and then Chelsea. So we'll know a lot more about Arsenal.
Do you want to go to some of those games? Should we go to some of those games together?
Yeah, I think we should go to a couple.
Want to go to North London derby?
I fancy that.
Okay. What about the Chelsea game? You fancy that as well?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll come on then. We'll do it. Let's do it.
Nice local one.
Why not? Let's just do it. We'll go there. All right, we'll do that. We'll bring you all the reaction to it as well right here on Premier League All Access. Let's move on because there's been some other big results. Tottenham Hotspur's home form continues to disappoint. Well, it was the first time that Tottenham Hotspur scored a 90th minute goal in a Premier League game and haven't gone on to win. They thought they had when Richarlison had stuck it home. He ripped his shirt off. He ran into the crowd. Thomas Frank got excited. So did everyone in the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. But then they forgot to mark Matthijs de Ligt from a 96th minute corner. This just sort of underscores, I think, the lack of consistency that Tottenham Hotspur have shown over the course of 2025, Crook.
Yeah, but you asked the question about the Arsenal game. Was it a point gained or two drop? You can ask the same question of Manchester United. And I was still more frustrated that they didn't win the game than the fact ultimately they've ended up managing to rescue a point, because 1-0 up, they played really well in the first half. I think Ruben Amorim got his tactics spot on with the false number 9 of Cunha. Ahmad played really well, and Bumo got his customary goal against Spurs. And they had opportunities to put the game to bed. Benjamin Šeško, after coming off the bench, has had 2 huge chances. The first one, Mason Mount has played a lovely ball to set him away, and he was just too slow to get the ball out from under his feet. In the second, when he's ended up getting injured, when he didn't get the shot away quickly enough. If one of those goes in, United are back on the bus. They're going up the M6 and they've won the game. They then managed to find themselves 2-1 behind. Good character to come back and get the equaliser. But ultimately, I think it's 2 points drop for United.
Okay, Kevin, I asked him a question about Tottenham and he gave me an answer about Manchester United. The question was about Tottenham because Tottenham are in a position where the fans aren't entirely
I thought Tottenham were poor for most of the game.
Well, okay, you've had your say and you went on about Manchester United. So let's ask Kevin for a more sort of considered answer about Tottenham, because there is a disconnect between fans and ownership, definitely, but I think there's still the jury's out on Thomas Frank, which is weird in a sense because you know that if they'd won that game, they were literally one de Ligt header away from being second in the table at lunchtime on Saturday. Yet there is a little bit of dissatisfaction, and that was sort of exemplified by the fact that when Matthijs Tel replaced Xavi Simons in the second half of the game, there were boos from the Tottenham Hotspur fans.
Yeah.
And actually, then Tell gets the equaliser, which almost powered them to victory. It was a comeback that then should have really resulted in 3 points.
I think the first thing about Tottenham is you mentioned injuries for Arsenal earlier. They're missing some really creative players. No Kulusevski, no Maddison. That's huge, because what they are the guys that can build on the defensive structure that I think he's been working on in the opening weeks and months of the season. Because the truth is, Ange Postecoglou wins the Europa League. That is a massive achievement that nobody should ever take away, because Tottenham do not win trophies in general. So that is a huge success for him. However, the structure of the team was not conducive to winning points in the Premier League. There was clear proof of that. And what Thomas Frank's done is he's come in. He's a pragmatist at heart, right? He sees problems. He wants to fix them. He wants to get the defensive structure right. However, when you play as poorly in attack as they do at the moment, you are always going to invite criticism. And the raw material should be there. You know, you've got Colin Muani, you've got Xavi, but I think they're still adapting. So they are really bad at home when teams don't necessarily give them space to play. When they can counter-attack, as they did at Everton really, really well, and they made the most of set pieces recently, then that plays into their hands. So it's going to be a painful period, I think, for a while he gets that balance right and while he has those key players out. He's got a lot of young attacking players. I was so pleased for Tell, because I think he's better than he's showing. I genuinely do think that. I think there's something there. And I actually think Bayern made a rare mistake when they let him go, because I think they've actually got a slot for him. He could have played the Jackson role this season and been perfectly good. I think he could have done a fine job. So I'm pleased for him. Thought Odegaard was excellent in the closing stages of the game. So it's very much a work in progress, and I think Spurs fans need to show a little bit of patience. We're not looking at Conte ball necessarily. You know, I think in the long run they'll be more exciting, but it is going to take a while to get there.
Well, they have to be, don't they? Because they're not exciting at the moment. And, you know, talking to Spurs fans at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium on Saturday, one of them come up to me and said, you know what, the fact is that we played just as badly, really, against Everton as we did in maybe even the home game against Chelsea. The difference was we got 2 set-piece goals, and that gave us a little bit of room, and it, you know, puts a little lick of paint on the place, and everyone feels a lot better about it because you've got 3 points. So they have been sort of trudging through and getting results when maybe the performances have been pretty staid. I was at the Newcastle game in the Carabao Cup, and they were pretty poor in that as well. But one of the issues I've sort of identified, I think you've sort of mentioned this as well, is the fact that their quality in the final third is just not good enough. But they should be better, shouldn't they? Because despite the injuries, they have got Tell, they have got Kolo Muani. This is, you know, players that have either they've spent a lot of money on or who are worth a lot of money in the market. Simons, who actually I thought played well for most of the games, his best performance I saw in the Premier League at the weekend. They have Kudus. I know it wasn't available at the weekend, but they have had him available for most of the season, a good player. Odegaard, you've already mentioned. Bergvall, who's excellent, a real talent. I know he's been out for a week because of concussion protocols, but for most of the season, he's been there as well. Sarr is great at driving with the ball and good, long, accurate passes. And Pedro Porro's delivery into the box is usually absolutely spot on. The issue you've got here, and I know Solanke's injured, but they just don't have anyone to put the ball in the net with any regularity. That is a major, major issue, especially bearing in mind they've spent a lot of money in that area, Crook.
Yeah, I mean, Solanke's been a massive loss, and it's ironic because he was hardly ever injured at Bournemouth. He obviously missed games last season for Spurs, and we don't know when we're going to see him back this season. So I think that's a big problem. Obviously, I've mentioned Ivan Toney. That seems to be gathering a little bit of momentum now, but from what I'm told, it's going to be difficult to get him out of Saudi Arabia in January because of the tax implications. Also, I know there's been suggestions that by coming back to the Premier League, he might get in the England squad. He won't. I think Thomas Tuchel has already made his mind up in that regard. But they are lacking at the top end of the pitch. And you mentioned Pedro Porro there. As good as he is going forward, I'm still not entirely convinced about him as a defender.
Okay. They've got a big week when they come back because they have got a away trip, which they like away trips, to Arsenal when they come back in the North London derby. And then they've got a few more Champions League games to get their teeth into. I think PSG is their next one after that as away from home, just a couple of days after they play against Arsenal. So there's a big week for Tottenham when they come back from the international break. Brentford beat Newcastle by 3-1. Keith Andrews, isn't he doing a good job? It's a good job Crook gave him stick before the start of the season, because he is responding in kind, isn't he, Kev? He's done a fantastic job.
He has. And look, I have some sympathy with Crookie for once here. Because
Don't have any sympathy with Crook. He doesn't need anybody's sympathy.
I feel dirty having said that. It's very strange.
Yeah. Go and have a shower.
But he was a set play coach. He had no senior coaching track record to go on. So nobody knew how this was going to turn out. But what's been really impressive, we could talk about the long throws all we want. That's a huge part of it. Of course, that's a huge part of it. The scoring goals from it, the hurling the ball into the box. But actually, what's really impressed me watching them is how much they look like a unit and how comfortable they are in the roles that they have. Because I think defensively, they are strong. I think Damsgaard is a super player. I mean, he looks like, a gust of wind could blow him over, but he's a sensational player. And I think he's really come to the fore. Igor Thiago, who we knew could score goals at Club Brugge. That's no guarantee of anything. He's been out for a year with that knee injury, but he's back now, and he looks built for the Premier League. He's been excellent so far. And Kevin Hatchard as well. I mean, he's another one that surprised me by just how consistent he's been. Because, again, he was a raw talent, came from Germany. There were no guarantees there. So you have to give them immense credit for the way that Andrews has carried on what Frank did and actually tweaked it a little bit into his style that he wants to see. They were also denied what I felt, I don't know about you guys, but what I felt was one of the clearest penalties.
Oh, don't you go down the Perry Groves route.
In a long time. I still am trying to work out how that was a yellow card for simulation, but maybe
because
my
he
eyes
dived.
Are going, who knows?
Because he dived.
But there's clear contact on the ankle.
Oh, okay. So if I kick you on the top of the boot, you jump up in the air, throw your arms up like that, and kick the back of your backside.
He sold
your heels,
it. I'm not telling you he didn't sell
it.
Well,
it was a genuine attempt to deceive the referee. So I'm sorry that he deserved the yellow card for going over the top. If
but
you compare
even
that
Dan
to
Burn was smiling at Ouattara and kind of shrugging his shoulders.
But Dan Burn gave up too easily on that, and he gave up on the second one too easily as well, by the way, when there was, again, only minimal contact between the two, and he just walked off. I was like, what are you doing? At least protest. Honestly, I cannot believe that he thought he was going to get away with jumping up in the air and starfishing and wasn't going to get booked. It was if you compare that to the Doku one, Doku attempts to stay on his feet. And we've talked about this on the Men in Black thing. He attempts to stay on his feet. He made a genuine attempt to keep playing, and he can't continue because he was fouled. The fact is that Ouattara, there was contact, but he has no interest in trying to play the ball. His only interest is to try and do a dance move from Pineapple Dance Studios and get up and try and get a penalty, which, I'm so delighted he didn't get for the road.
But does that knock out the fact that he was tripped?
It does. It wasn't tripped. Okay. It was minimal contact on the top of the foot. And I tell you, I'm so pleased that the referee stood up to him, because otherwise that's what's going to happen. Every time someone gets touched in the penalty area, people are going to fling their arms around.
But did he then even it up afterwards?
He probably did even it up, because I don't think the second one was a pen either.
I don't either. So that's a worry as well, because he's then evening up what he did before.
But the reaction from Dan Burn, just to say fair cop, Gov, and start to walk off. Maybe it was.
That annoyed me. Anyway, Men in Black, which is underneath this. If you just scroll up, you can get into it. And me and Chris Foyer have had about 3 rows today. So I don't want to get into it with you as well, Kev, because I've already lost enough friends. We were talking about Keith Andrews and his managerial adaptation. I think you need to give credit to the genius of Matt Benham, the owner of Brentford Football Club, right? Yeah. Since he took over, I know Matt a little bit, I've met him a few times. And when he first took over the football club, he sort of sold me the reasons why he was doing it. It was because he was a massive fan. He was investing money into what was at the time the Bees Trust. But he felt as if the club needed a lot more professionalism and expertise in order to take it forward. So he convinced the Bees Trust to take it out of fan ownership and let him buy the football club. Since then, if you can tell me one mistake he's made in appointing a manager, I would love to hear it, because he always gets it right. And instead of sort of sitting there and being skeptical when they appointed Keith Andrews, what we should have done is gone, do you know what? Matt Benham knows what he's doing, so there's a reason why he has decided to go down this road. Because if you go back, Dean Smith, Thomas Frank, now Keith Andrews, even before that, managers that have always progressed the football club and taken them on to the next level. And I think he deserves credit, and he's hardly ever spoken about Matt Benham, but I think he needs to be recognised.
Yeah, I agree. And it's the same with the recruitment as well. You wondered how would they cope losing Johan Wisser and Brian Mbermo, their two main goal scorers from last season. But they knew they had Thiago waiting to make an impact. And my word, has he made an impact? He's a real handful, isn't he?
Yeah, he is. Should we talk about Newcastle? Poor away from home again. And Eddie Howe, Crook, under a little bit of pressure from a bit of outside noise. Maybe that's a little bit too much. Maybe we're amplifying that. But I think he sort of said it himself, didn't he? This is the first time we're going to be under real scrutiny after 4 years in charge.
Yeah, and I think that's fair in some regard, because the away form is lamentable. It's not just the fact they've not won away from home this season. It's the lethargic nature of the performances, that a byproduct of playing Champions League football, possibly. And I think if you go back a couple of seasons, they did struggle to back up what they were doing in Europe when it came to the Premier League the following weekend. But you have to also take into account the turmoil of the summer, that Alexander Isak situation. As I've already said, there were no winners from that. Personally, I think the hierarchy should have intervened much sooner and said, look, we're going to sell this guy. This is the asking price. Get it done. And then you wouldn't have had the sort of cloud hanging over Newcastle. They did. Johan Wisser has signed and immediately got injured. So we're yet to see what he can do in the Newcastle shirt, which does leave them short of options up front. They've had injuries, haven't they? Tino Livramento was playing really well before he got injured. So I think there are mitigating circumstances, but at the moment, because of that away form, they're a long way off challenging for a Champions League place for next season.
Yeah, no away win from home since April in the Premier League. And more importantly, that's racking up to 9 games now. That's a big issue. Let's head down to the depths of the table now and see what it means for the relegation picture as it stands, starting with the lowest of the low, Wolverhampton Wanderers. Well, look, Wolverhampton Wanderers did their best to try and sort of stay compact and cause Chelsea problems in the first 45 minutes of this game. James Collins said this group can get something out of this season. He maintains that they can stay up. Look, there's no point in sort of analysing it too much from Wolves' perspective, on the basis that by the time we get back together again in a couple of weeks' time, they'll have a new manager, and that new manager is going to be Rob Edwards. Why has he taken the job? Does he really believe he can keep them up? And how annoyed are Middlesbrough?
Well, Middlesbrough are fuming, and actually a lot of non-Middlesbrough fans seem to have taken umbrage on their behalf as well. I don't really get that. My personal opinion is that rather than being pilloried for trying to save the club that he holds closer to his heart, I think we should applaud Rob Edwards for taking on the challenge, because I think they're doomed. If I was advising him, I would tell him to stay where he is, but he's got this pull to Wolves, having been a player there and interim manager at one stage. He grew up in Telford. He's still got strong family ties to the area, and I think that is what is driving him. It's not a money motivated decision, but it's going to be very difficult to keep them up because they've got a distinct lack of quality, although I'm told he believes this Wolves team is better than the Luton team that he did make competitive in the Premier League. So I think they will pick up results under his stewardship, but I don't think they're going to get enough points to save themselves. And the fact they've given him a 3.5-year contract, I think that tells you that Wolves are aware of the situation and they're planning already for life in the Championship next season, and see Rob Edwards as someone who can bring them back up if the worst happens.
27 games left, Kevin. Even if he averages a point per game between now and the end of the season, that is not going to be enough to save them, is it?
No, and I don't think they have the depth of quality you need. I think that squad isn't fit for purpose. I think time and time again they've sold key players for lots of money and haven't necessarily replaced them adequately. I think there are some good players in there. I think some of the midfielders, I think Andre's great. I think João Gomez is a player that other clubs would look at and take. I think that's what you're always looking at. Would other Premier League clubs take certain players? And they have. Cunha went.
They usually do.
Yeah, they usually do. But now you look at that team and you think, well, who would really be picked off? Very few, I think, is the truth of it. Strand Larsen maybe, and he obviously had his head turned in the summer by Newcastle, and that didn't quite work out. So that would be a big concern. I applaud it too. Because I think any time you have a manager who has an emotional connection with a club, I think that's an important starting point. And I always want that to work, because I think that those community ties are really important in football, and we forget that sometimes. So I think that's really, really great. But yeah, he's got a hell of a job. And I do wonder whether they are thinking, right, let's get in a position where, I mean, obviously they're going to, 27 games left, they're going to fight for a place in the Premier League. But I think in the backs of their minds, they'll know they've messed this up, and they'll think about how do we bounce back quickly if we have to. So the first thing will be about getting them in a structure where they can at least compete. I thought they did against Chelsea for large parts. I thought Garnacho was excellent, actually.
Yeah.
And he is a player that the big question about him has always been consistency. We know he can do, great stuff. We know he's got good technical quality. We know he's quick. But he has to have an end product at the top end of the pitch, and he did that. Great cross for Gusto, and great assist for the third goal as well. So, yeah, very, very impressive from him. But Wolves were pretty awful again for the most part.
I mean, Garnacho is only 21 years of age, so I think there's a lot of room for growth there. And he's certainly, when he's at his best, he can deliver. And I think everybody knows that. He's just doing it week in, week out. And the energy as well to sort of, continue to work back when necessary. One of the things that has caused him to lose his place in the Chelsea team was the fact that Jamie Gittings would come in and outwork him and get back and help out Mark Cucurella in the left fullback position when things were going against them. I think it's a little bit easier for him when you're playing against a team like Wolves, because you have a lot of the ball and you don't have to do as much tracking back. Yeah. So he prefers those matches. But look, if he can get the other side of the game into his performances, then he's got the chance to be a great player for Chelsea, because he's a huge talent. And I'm really delighted that I left him on my bench in the Fantasy Premier League draft this week and lost as a result of that, because 11 points would have won me the game. Jurgen Strand-Larsen doesn't score enough goals, 3 in 14 this season, 2 of those came in the League Cup. So if you analyse it properly over the course of the season in the Premier League, he's got 1 goal so far. That is not a recipe for success. I don't know how they're going to unlock something there, but they've got to find a way of getting more goals into that team. Chelsea, I don't care that everybody is going to laugh here. I don't care that people are going to say you are going over the top. I have gone full Crook, bold claim on this. Esteval is going to win the Ballon d'Or at some point. He is that good. He is absolutely sensational. I don't care that he's 18. He is the star of this team. Stop holding him back and resting him and waiting for him, 20 minutes before the end. Bring him into the team. Let this guy flourish. He is off the scale. He is creative, competitive, deadly. He's talented. He's silky. He comes up with a fantastic goal. He's a Brazilian superstar. Yes, he's 18, but imagine how good he's going to be when he grows up. He is absolutely top drawer, Kevin.
I'll have a ticket for that train. Yes, absolutely. Because your excitement about him is similar to my excitement about Dembele when he was a teenager. And the stuff that he was doing for Dortmund, the stuff that he was doing in top games, made me think that he could win the Ballon d'Or one day. He took a hell of a long time to get there, but he got there. And I think Esteban is just as exciting, and he's doing it at a higher level potentially, because obviously Dembele was, a top team in the Bundesliga, but it's not quite the same thing. I think when you look at Esteban, what you need to look at is what he's already done. Palmeiras were a team that he thrived at, but that was pressure, because by then Palmeiras were expected to challenge for stuff and win stuff, and they did. And he was a big part of them doing that. So you're talking about a guy who's still incredibly young, but he's actually had that grounding at a club where there's huge pressure. So that's a really big sign for him. He needs the right coach who's not going to hold him back and is going to kind of allow him to flourish. And I hope Maresca can be that for him, because he does tend towards the cautious now and again. But I totally agree with you. I think he's one of the most exciting players in Europe already. I think the talent is there. The fact that he's making big contributions already, winner against Liverpool, contributions in the Champions League as well, I think is really exciting. And I agree with you. I think he can be a Ballon d'Or winner. And I think he can get there quicker than Dembele completed that journey. That's no knock against Dembele, by the way, I still love. He's still one of my top players. But yeah, I fully agree with you. I'm on that train.
Yes, the Esther Wow train, because that's what he makes us do every time he picks up the football. I mean, Chelsea overall did the job the way that you expected them to. João Pedro, he obviously recognises the quality. And like I said to Crook last year, we were lucky enough to be in like some Chelsea groups or whatever, where everyone would always, every single week, send videos of this guy who was absolutely ripping it up from Palmeiras. And Chelsea had already bought him. We knew it was coming. And I think a few of us were like, is he really going to be able to make the transition? Because he was scoring bangers in the Brazilian league. And we're like, is he going to be able to make the transition to the Premier League? Well, it seems like he hasn't even taken a misstep. There are games, actually, and he started a couple where he sort of floats out of the match a little bit because, the physicality and the intensity. But as he gets into that and gets his second wind, he's going to get even better, which is great. But Chelsea also getting up there towards the top end of the table as well, which I think Enzo Maresca needed after a indifferent start to the campaign. It wasn't all doom and gloom at the bottom of the table because there's a couple of other stragglers who have picked up some wins. West Ham edged closer to a little bit of joy. They beat Burnley by 3 goals. Was it 3-1 in the end? Or
3-2, was it?
You lost because you had 3-1, didn't you, for our special golden goals thing. And then you were texting me and gloating about it. And then all of a sudden, there was a late goal.
It was the last kick of the game, and Areola's basically chucked it in his own net. I've got to say, it wasn't a great advert for goalkeepers at London Stadium because Dubravka was at fault for 2 of the West Ham goals.
He was.
Areola was certainly at fault for that 3-2 goal. But they've turned the corner, West Ham, and I've got to say, I'm loving the new happy-go-lucky Nuno Espirito Santo. He hated dealing with the media when he was at Wolves and Tottenham. He got a bit better at Forest. He's charm personified now. After they beat Newcastle, he actually said to me, "Nice to see you again, big fella." So I'm all in favour. Keep smiling, Nuno. He's loving it.
It's so easy to turn him around, isn't it? Just to sit there and just, treat him in a certain way and stroke his little ego. And all of a sudden, he's putty in your hands. But Nuno's always been like this. When he, since he came back after the Saudi experience, he came back into the Premier League. At Forest, he was great with the media. He was absolutely superb. He was very smiley and happy. And he dealt with, if you remember the Marinakis incident where he comes onto the pitch, the way he dealt with that was such a statesman and so diplomatic. I thought he was excellent. Nottingham Forest themselves, his former team, they actually picked up their first win since the opening weekend of the season. And as a result, that drags a few into relegation trouble, Kevin, because I was looking at the table and I said it to Crook, actually, I'm a little bit concerned that Fulham have sort of started to fall into that group that could get sucked into a relegation fight.
Do you know what alarmed me about Fulham at the weekend? Marco Silva, in almost every post-match, will talk about how his team, if they didn't win, deserved to win. He'll talk about, I thought we were the better team. I thought we had a really good spell. We should have done. He didn't say that at the weekend against Everton.
No.
He said they were really poor. And that really stood out to me because he's usually, even in defeat, so positive about how his team played and felt they should have got more out of it. And he didn't say that. And I do wonder, where are the goals coming from? I worry about that. And I think they are in a bit of bother. And I think it goes under the radar. I mean, maybe not because clubs get linked with him a lot, but I think it goes under the radar just what a good job he's done. Just to actually make them as safe and as competitive and as mid-table as they are. Because the Premier League feels so competitive this season. If you come off it even a bit, you're suddenly in bother. You really are. So I would back him to turn that around, but I do worry about the quality at the top end for Fulham, maybe, and just some of the injury problems they've had as well. But that's a big win for Forest. It's quite a jarring one for Leeds as well, because they led in that game, actually had a goal from a striker, and then rather fell away. So, yeah, that's a bit of a concern for them. They're just on a bit of a tricky run at the moment.
I think we've all been talking about the fact the newly promoted teams are much more competitive this season. But you look at the table now, Wolves are going to go. We've said that. I think Burnley and Leeds go with them. So I still think 2 out of the 3 get relegated. I think Fulham will have just enough.
Yeah, just on Fulham and Marco Silva. I think Marco Silva in particular, things have just gone against him, really. If you go back over the course of the last couple of years and think about those big incidents, some VAR decisions that have cost him, some late goals in big games where they've almost qualified for Europe. You know, they're that good that they almost did it. But I think they've never replaced Alexander Mitrovic, and those goals that they had, they've never really quite found a way to get them. And that's been a big problem. The investment hasn't been there from the outside. And I'll go back to that FA Cup quarter-final against Manchester United. What an amazing opportunity that was. They were in control of that game before they imploded. And you just think there's incidents like that over the last couple of seasons where they've almost threatened to do something special and it hasn't quite worked out. But he set them up so brilliantly that you think he deserves a lot of credit. I just think that this journey is in danger of coming to an end soon unless things turn around. Dashing Daishi, all very happy then with Nottingham Forest. He made a triple substitution at the break. I wasn't convinced about the penalty that they won late on, but they'd already won the game by then, so it didn't really matter. Kevin, enjoy your international break. Just a quick word on some of the players that we're not going to see. Nick Pope is out of the England squad, Mark Gay out of the England squad, and Anthony Gordon as well. So 3 players have dropped out of Thomas Tuchel's squad for the games against Serbia and Albania, which you can hear live on talkSPORT. We'll have another podcast previewing those 2 games coming up in the next 48 hours, so make sure you stick around for that, and we'll review all of the action of the England camp next Monday when we look back on those 2 games. Kev, thanks very much. Have a good international break.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much, Crookie. Okay, that's it from Premier League All Access. Scroll up if you want to listen to Men in Black or watch Men in Black, and we'll be back in a couple of days' time.